Didn't Elon Musk come out recently for DeSantis?
Yeah, I think Ron DeSantis would work as a good president. I mean, what he's done for Florida has been admirable.
Look, I feel like I'm doing breaking news right now. Yeah. That wasn't even on purpose.
Elon Musk said it was a good idea, so it must be, naturally. So what did the Florida governor do that was so admirable? Naturally, Joe Rogan's going to tell us a long, detailed list of the things that Ron DeSantis has done for the people of Florida. Let's watch that.
I feel like what he did for Florida, a lot of people gave him a lot of grief, but ultimately he was correct. He was correct when it comes to like deaths. He was correct when it comes to protecting our vulnerable populations. He was correct in terms of distribution of monoclonal antibodies. And he was furious when the government tried to pull those. They were trying to pull very effective treatments.
All right, let's break this down because I think it's really important. He's talking about COVID deaths and he's talking about vulnerable populations. So DeSantis said, they were misreporting COVID deaths, that the numbers being reported were wrong. He's right that they were wrong. That is true. But DeSantis said the number of deaths was overstated when in reality, the DeSantis administration was understating the numbers. So let's look at this. We had one COVID death in Florida yesterday. Yes, you read that right, one. So that was Fred Piccolo, DeSantis's press secretary at the time. So the DeSantis administration was reporting that there was one COVID death on a day where there were 47. And this was something that they were doing systematically. The DeSantis administration was audited and was found to be undercounting the COVID cases and the death toll in Florida. So we have Ian Hodgson of the Miami Herald reporting that covering the state's pandemic response from March to October of 2020, the year-long analysis by the Florida Auditor General found missing case and death data, unreported ethnic and racial details, and incomplete contact tracing as the coronavirus spread across the state. So Joe Rogan specifically pointed to deaths and vulnerable populations. That is exactly the group of folks, and that's exactly the data that DeSantis's administration was responsible for underreporting, but they weren't just underreporting, as you just heard, they were also failing to prevent this spread. So the Miami Herald, again, auditors found that the state never spoke with 23% of infected individuals. Those who the state did contact were often reached over a week after testing positive, leaving ample time for them to spread the virus to others. So an admirable job. He was right, according to Joe Rogan. This was all good policymaking, presidential material. And Florida's still experiencing a high death toll under DeSantis's watch, and is the state right now with the second highest average deaths per 100,000 people in the country, with 53 average daily COVID deaths. DeSantis, he had no power over the monoclonal antibodies or the other treatments that Joe Rogan likes to talk about, like ivermectin. DeSantis really had no say in this. He was just someone who was complaining about it in the media a lot. But really, a lot of conservatives elect people who just say stuff in the media that they like while the people in their home state are dying. And I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think the details you provided that debunk the notion that Ron DeSantis was an effective leader in protecting his constituents against this virus. It's so important to share that with people. But I think what's behind Joe Rogan's endorsement of Ron DeSantis is honestly like the perception of COVID and the reality of COVID versus the reality of COVID. So let me make my point. Like, what for people like Rogan, who for the most part was insulated from the coronavirus pandemic. And what I mean by that is he has the kind of job where he doesn't need to be, in front of a bunch of customers. He's not a cashier. He's not in the service industry. He is operating in a room somewhere with a few other people in there, if that, and he's safe, right? Like it doesn't really have an impact on his body, on his health, because he's insulated from it relative to what most workers have to deal with. And so when you don't really see the ramifications personally of COVID, and you see all of these rules and regulations being implemented that are just like an inconvenience for you, all you see those measures as is annoyances, inconveniences. You want it to end, you want everything to go back to normal. And he also, unfortunately, like kind of operates in a world where a lot of conspiracy theorists love to opine about what's really behind what's going on. I will say in that same podcast episode, he pushed back when his guest tried to claim that they purposely shut down businesses to like make people suffer. And he's like, he called it Monday night quarterbacking, which I thought was interesting and I agree with. But with all of that said, I just think for people like Rogan, COVID unfortunately like radicalized him in the wrong ways. And I think when you put someone like DeSantis up against someone, and remember, DeSantis, he's the kind of politician who wants you to like give in to all of your bad urges, right? Because the bad urge is, I don't wanna change anything. I don't wanna wear the mask. I don't like it. I get it. That resonates with me. I have to wear makeup for work. I hated putting the mask on, hated it. But I also understood like, this is temporary, it's not the end of the world. If this is what I need to do to stop the spread of this virus, I'm just gonna do it and move on with my life. But for other people, it's just like endless annoyances, especially when you exist in a more affluent situation where you're overwhelmingly insulated from the realities of the pandemic.
So true, absolutely. The case that Rogan is super disconnected from everyday Americans who had to go to work during the pandemic. And honestly, a lot of people see Rogan as a guy who speaks up for the average American, for the little guy. I don't know if I buy that. But he does have a responsibility with such a large audience to look into what he's pushing to his base. I mean, there will be people who say, I trust Joe Rogan, so maybe I'll look into DeSantis now, and that's really scary. But Joe Rogan also did make a really weird statement about freedom and DeSantis right after this. Let's watch that.
He is not perfect. He's a human being, but what he's done is stand up for freedoms. And people think so this was some weird gaslighting shit that went on where people equated freedom and saying the word freedom to like right-wing bigotry and hate. It is so strange.
Yeah, how could we possibly confuse what DeSantis is saying with right-wing bigotry and hate? It kind of seems like Joe Rogan's the one that's confusing these two things here, because in the name of freedom, DeSantis has been pushing legislation that suggests people can't talk about LGBTQ plus identities in schools. Is that about freedom? Let's be really real about what Ron DeSantis stands for. And I think the right frequently confuses this notion of freedom with actually our rights being stripped away, as we can see with all of the Supreme Court rulings that have come out on Friday and the days afterwards. And so the right being the party of freedom and fighting for personal freedoms is something that we dissect a lot on this show and that we absolutely don't buy. And this is just a weird statement from Joe Rogan.
Yeah, and look, the Republican Party has done a very good job in their PR messaging in regard to liberty and freedom, right? They have taken the mantle of patriotism, even though they actively hate this country, hate what the Constitution entails, and want to roll back the accomplishments and improvements in this country. But it doesn't matter, because if you say something repeatedly over and over again, people start to believe it. And most people aren't spending all day reading about what's happening in government. Most people are super busy just trying to ensure that their family members are fed, making sure that they can pay the insanely expensive rent in this country. And so you just hear it over and over again in the media, and it's like, I don't know, I guess the Republicans are for freedom. Whereas the Democrats, just MIA, no strategy, no effective messaging. And yeah, I think that the left needs to get better about labeling the right wing as anti-freedom, anti-liberty. I want to emphasize over and over again how much the right wing wants to legislate what you're allowed to do in your own bedroom. Like, that's on their mind. That's not freedom, okay? That is allowing for the government to make decisions for you in the most intimate areas of your life, whether it's reproductive rights, whether it's what you do with your partner intimately in your own bedroom. They want to do away with certain contraceptives. They're not about freedom and liberty at all, period. And by the way, on top of all of that, they want to punish you if you take part in the BDS movement, which should also be considered unconstitutional. But we've got religious zealots in the Supreme Court, so.